In the early 1790s, the United States stood at a dangerous crossroads. The American Revolution had been won, but peace had not followed. Beyond the Appalachian Mountains, the Northwest Territory was still contested ground, and the authority of a young United States was far from secure. Two armies had already been sent west to assert control. Both had failed. In 1790, General Josiah Harmar led an expedition into the Ohio country. His force was poorly coordinated and badly defeated by Native American warriors defending their land. The following year, the United States tried again. That second attempt ended in catastrophe. In November of 1791, an American army under General Arthur St. Clair was surprised at dawn near the headwaters of the Wabash River. The result was the worst defeat the United States Army has ever suffered. More than half of St. Clair's force was killed or wounded in a single morning. Entire units ceased to exist. The frontier was left exposed. For Native American nations of the region, these victories confirmed something crucial. The United States could be beaten. For President George Washington and his administration, the implications were terrifying. If the United States could not control the Northwest Territory, it risked losing not just land but credibility. British forces still occupied frontier forts in the region despite the Treaty of Paris. Native American resistance was growing more unified. American settlers continued to pour westward, and violence escalated on both sides. Failure was no longer an option. The response was not another hurried militia expedition. Instead, the United States did something it had resisted since independence. It built a professional army. In 1792, Washington authorized the creation of a new force, unlike anything the nation had fielded before. It was called the Legion of the United States. Its soldiers were trained year-round. Discipline was enforced. Every march ended with fortified camps. Every weakness exposed by earlier disasters was addressed. To lead it, Washington chose a man with a reputation for relentless determination, Major General Anthony Wayne. Wayne was not cautious. He was methodical. He believed preparation, discipline, and control of terrain mattered more than speed. Under his command, the Legion drilled constantly. Officers were held accountable. Encampments were secured every night, even in hostile territory. Native American leaders took notice. Some began to question whether this new army could be defeated the way Harmar and St. Clair had been. Miami leader Little Turtle warned that Wayne was different. He urged negotiation. Others disagreed. By the summer of 1794, the Northwest stood on the edge of a final confrontation. One side believed it could still stop American expansion. The other believed it had finally learned how to win. What followed would not be a long battle, but it would decide the future of the American frontier. To understand why the Battle of Fallen Timbers happened, you have to understand the pressure building on every side of the Northwest Territory. After the American Revolution, the United States claimed ownership of lands north of the Ohio River. This claim came from the 1783 Treaty of Paris, which transferred British sovereignty of the region to the United States. But treaties signed in Europe did not erase reality on the ground. Native American nations living in the region had not agreed to give up their land. Shawnee, Miami, Delaware, Wyandotte, Ottawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and others had lived, hunted, and governed there for generations. They rejected the idea that land could be transferred without their consent. As American settlers moved west, conflict became unavoidable. Raids, counter-raids, and reprisals spread across the frontier. Settlers were attacked. Native villages were burned. Each side viewed the other as the aggressor. By the mid-1780s, Native leaders recognized that resistance would only work if they stood together. A broad confederacy formed, uniting multiple nations around a shared goal, stopping American expansion north of the Ohio River. At the same time, British influence never truly disappeared. Although Britain had ceded the territory on paper, British garrisons continued to occupy frontier forts near the Great Lakes. British officials in Canada supplied arms and encouragement to Native resistance, not necessarily to provoke war, but to slow American expansion and protect British interests. The Northwest Territory became a geopolitical fault line. The United States responded with force, but poorly. The Harmar Campaign of 1790 ended in defeat. The St. Clair Campaign of 1791 ended in disaster. Together, they proved that militia forces were not capable of fighting a coordinated native confederacy in dense wilderness terrain. For native leaders, these victories reinforced confidence. For American leadership, they exposed a crisis. President Washington and Secretary of War Henry Knox concluded that the problem was not manpower. It was organization, discipline, and leadership. The militia system that had worked during the Revolution was failing in frontier warfare. The solution was radical by American standards. Instead of relying on temporary forces, the United States created a permanent, professional army. This new force, the Legion of the United States, was structured differently from previous armies. It combined infantry, artillery, dragoons, and riflemen into integrated sublegions, capable of fighting independently or together. Training was constant. Officers were expected to enforce discipline. Camps were fortified every night. Even when no enemy was visible, Anthony Wayne was given time, something his predecessors never had. Wayne drilled his men relentlessly. He punished disorder. He dismissed officers who failed to meet standards. His army learned to move deliberately, protected supply lines, and denied the enemy easy victories. Native scouts noticed the difference. Wayne did not rush forward. He built forts as he advanced, securing each step northward. Fort Greenville, Fort Recovery, and Fort Defiance formed a chain of American control deep into contested territory. Fort Recovery, built directly on the site of St. Clair's defeat, carried symbolic weight. When Native American forces attacked it in June 1794, they were repelled. The Legion held its ground and recovered cannons lost 3 years earlier. That battle marked a turning point. Within the Native Confederacy, doubts emerged. Miami leader Little Turtle openly questioned whether Wayne could be defeated. He warned that this army was different, better trained, better prepared, and unwilling to be surprised. He urged negotiation. Shawnee leader Blue Jacket disagreed. Blue Jacket believed Wayne could be defeated just as Harmar and St. Clair had been. He argued that terrain and surprise still favored native forces. He accused Little Turtle of losing faith. Little Turtle stepped aside. Leadership passed Blue Jacket. As Wayne advanced toward the Maumee River in the summer of 1794, both sides understood what was coming. The Confederacy prepared for a decisive stand. British forces constructed Fort Miami to signal their presence without committing to war. Diplomacy failed. The stage was set for a final confrontation, one that would determine whether native resistance could hold the Northwest, or whether the United States had finally learned how to impose control. By the summer of 1794, Anthony Wayne was ready to move. Unlike earlier commanders, he did not rush into native-held territory, hoping speed would compensate for weakness. Wayne understood that in the Northwest, terrain was as important as manpower, and preparation mattered more than numbers. His advance followed the Maumee River corridor, a natural route through the region that had long served as a transportation and trade artery. The river linked native villages, British forts, and American objectives, making it unavoidable for any force seeking control of the area. But Wayne did not simply march. Every movement was calculated. The Legion advanced in short stages, stopping early in the day to construct fortified camps. This practice denied Native American forces the dawn attacks that had destroyed Harmar and St. Clair. Wayne's men dug earthworks, posted proper pickets, and secured artillery every night, even when no enemy was visible. Native scouts observed this carefully. They saw that surprise was no longer easy. As the Legion moved north from Fort Recovery in mid-August, Wayne ordered the construction of additional positions, including Fort Adams and Fort Defiance. Fort Defiance was built at the confluence of the Auglaize and Maumee Rivers, deep in territory claimed by the Native Confederacy. Its name was not accidental. Wayne was signaling intent. British officials watched closely. In response to Wayne's advance, they constructed Fort Miami along the Maumee River, just miles from the anticipated battlefield. The fort was meant to protect British interests near Detroit and serve as a warning to the Americans, but it was also deliberately ambiguous. Britain did not want open war with the United States. Wayne pressed forward anyway. As both sides maneuvered, Native leaders searched for terrain that could offset the Legion's growing discipline and artillery. They found it near present-day Maumee, Ohio. The ground itself was unusual. A powerful storm, possibly a tornado, had recently torn through the area. Hundreds of trees were toppled and tangled together, creating a dense barrier of fallen trunks, branches, and brush. The debris stretched for nearly a mile. To a trained European-style army, this was hostile ground. Formations would break. Cavalry would struggle. Artillery movement would be restricted. To Blue Jacket and the Native Confederacy, it looked ideal. The fallen trees formed a natural abatis, a defensive obstacle used deliberately in European warfare. The native forces positioned themselves among the tangled timber, believing the terrain would slow the Legion and allow them to strike at close range, where marksmanship and familiarity with the forest gave them an advantage. The Confederacy assembled roughly 1,300 to 1,500 warriors. They included Shawnee under Blue Jacket, Miami under Little Turtle, Delaware under Buckingahelas, Wyandotte leaders including Tarhee and Roundhead, Ottawa under Igishawah, Potawatomi under Little Otter, Ojibwe Mingos, a small number of Mohawks, and even a company of Canadian militia dressed as native warriors. In preparation, many of the warriors fasted, following spiritual tradition before battle. Wayne, meanwhile, continued to deny opportunity. He stopped short of Fort Miami to establish Fort Deposit, leaving baggage and heavy supplies behind so the Legion could advance lighter and faster. This decision would prove critical. By August 19th, Wayne's scouts confirmed that native forces were positioned ahead. He did not rush. Instead, he tightened his columns and prepared for contact. Rain fell overnight, leading some native warriors to believe the battle might be delayed. Some drifted toward Fort Miami to break their fast. Others remained in position among the fallen trees. Both sides expected a fight. What neither side could fully predict was how decisively Wayne would seize control once contact was made. The terrain that was meant to trap the Legion would soon become a liability. And the careful, deliberate march that had frustrated native tactics for weeks was about to be tested in open combat. The morning of August 20th, 1794, began under gray skies. Rain had fallen earlier, and the ground near the Maumee River was damp and uneven. Some Native American warriors believed the weather might delay the American advance. Others had moved closer to Fort Miami to break their fast, assuming the battle would not begin that day. Anthony Wayne did not share that assumption. Before dawn, the Legion moved forward in compact columns. Wayne had learned from every previous disaster in the Northwest. He expected contact, and he expected confusion when it came. The Kentucky Mounted Militia rode at the front of the column. Behind them came the infantry sublegions, with artillery and dragoons positioned centrally so they could respond quickly in any direction. The scouts were barely 100 yards into the tangled terrain when the first shots rang out. Native American warriors fired from the fallen trees, striking suddenly and with precision. The effect on the Kentucky militia was immediate. Horses panicked. Riders broke formation. Within moments, the militia scattered backward through the advancing column. For an instant, it looked like history repeating itself. Some American infantry units mistook the fleeing militia for enemy forces. One detachment even fired into confusion, worsening the chaos. Shouting filled the air. Smoke drifted through the broken timber. Visibility collapsed. This was the moment that had destroyed earlier American armies. But this time, the collapse stopped. Wayne did not panic. He rode directly toward the sound of the firing and began issuing orders with speed and clarity. Light infantry companies were pushed forward to stabilize the line and prevent a full rout. Officers forced men back into formation, not by speeches, but by presence. Artillery was brought forward. As Native American warriors pressed in from the fallen trees, American gunners fired grape shot into the tangled undergrowth. The effect was immediate and disruptive. The terrain that had protected the Confederacy now worked against it, funneling movement and limiting flexibility. Blue Jacket's plan relied on the Americans breaking apart. They did not. Native forces surged forward unevenly. Some warriors advanced aggressively, while others remained deeper in the timber, expecting the Legion to dissolve. Instead, Wayne's line held long enough to reform. The fighting grew more intense. Hand-to-hand combat erupted in places where visibility was low. Tomahawks and knives clashed with bayonets and musket stocks. Smoke thickened. Orders were difficult to hear, but command remained intact. Wayne had trained for exactly this moment. He had anticipated the militia breaking. He had positioned regulars where they could absorb the shock. He had kept his artillery close rather than strung out. As the initial chaos settled, the Legion began to assert control. Infantry lines formed on both wings of the column. Officers maintained spacing. Artillery continued to fire into fallen trees, breaking up coordinated resistance. The Native American ambush, carefully planned and spiritually prepared, began to unravel. Not because of lack of courage, but because the enemy refused to behave as expected. This was no longer a surprise attack against an unprepared force. It was a battle against an army that had learned how to survive the opening moments. And Anthony Wayne was not finished. What came next would decide the outcome in minutes. As the smoke thickened among the fallen trees, Anthony Wayne saw the opening he had been waiting for. The Native American attack had surged forward unevenly. Some warriors pressed hard against the Legion center, while others remained deeper in the timber, waiting for the American line to collapse the way it had in earlier battles. It did not. Wayne understood that prolonged firefights in broken terrain favored neither side. What mattered now was momentum. When his aides asked for instructions, Wayne gave an order that would define the battle: charge the damned rascals with the bayonet. This was not bravado. It was calculated. Bayonet charges were rare in frontier warfare, but Wayne knew his men had been trained for this exact maneuver. The Legion advanced at a steady pace, not running, not breaking formation. Muskets were leveled. Bayonets were fixed. Captain Robert Campbell led the first decisive movement, charging forward with his dragoons across open ground beyond the fallen timber. Sabers drawn, they drove directly into native positions. Campbell was killed in the charge, and several dragoons fell with him. But the psychological effect was immediate. The Native American line began to give way. Warriors who had expected the Americans to falter instead found disciplined infantry advancing through smoke and debris, forcing them backward out of timber and into more open ground. The fallen trees that had provided cover now trapped movement and slowed retreat. On the Legion's left, Lieutenant Colonel Jean-Francois Hamtramck brought his sublegions forward in tight formation. They encountered Wyandotte, Delaware, and Canadian militia fighters who attempted to hold ground through sustained fire. A sharp exchange followed, but the Legion pressed forward with bayonets fixed. Kentucky militia units, previously scattered, regrouped and moved through swampy terrain to flank retreating native positions. This maneuver cut off organized withdrawal and further disrupted coordination. Leadership losses compounded the collapse. Ottawa leader Igishua was shot through the eye. Potawatomi leader Little Otter was severely wounded and carried from the field. Another Ottawa chief, Turkeyfoot, climbed onto a large rock to rally the warriors and urge them to stand fast. He was shot in the chest and killed almost instantly. The loss of visible leaders had a devastating effect. According to British Indian Department officials, these losses made native casualties seem far greater than they were, accelerating the retreat. As the Confederacy fell back toward the Maumee River, the terrain changed again. Beyond the ravine near the battlefield, the ground opened, trees thinned, visibility improved. This favored the Legion. Dragoons now had room to maneuver. Infantry lines advanced faster. Native forces attempted to regroup near the ravine, but discipline had broken down. The retreat became a rout. Some British agents attempted to rally the warriors one final time. They urged them to fall back to Fort Miami, believing British protection would allow them to regroup. The Native American forces reached the fort. The gates were closed. Major William Campbell, the British commander at Fort Miami, refused to open them. He would not risk war with the United States by sheltering retreating warriors while the Legion stood nearby. The moment shattered any remaining cohesion. Warriors scattered northward, abandoning the field entirely. The battle had lasted just over an hour. When the smoke cleared, the Legion held the ground. American losses totaled 33 killed and roughly 100 wounded. Native casualties were estimated between 25 and 40 killed, though exact numbers were difficult to determine. But numbers alone did not tell the story. This was the first clear, decisive victory of the United States Army over a major native confederacy. Not a raid, not a skirmish, a battlefield victory. And it was not yet finished. After fighting ended, Anthony Wayne did not pursue the scattered Native American forces into the wilderness. Instead, he stopped. The Legion encamped in full view of Fort Miami, the British stronghold along the Maumee River. For 3 days, American troops rested, regrouped, and displayed their presence unmistakably within cannon range of the fort. The message was deliberate. Wayne had defeated the Native Confederacy in open battle, but a greater danger remained. Britain still maintained military forces in the region, despite earlier treaties. A single misstep could turn a frontier war into an international one. The British commander at Fort Miami, Major William Campbell, understood this clearly. When the first Native American warriors fled toward the fort during the battle, Campbell had closed the gates. He refused them refuge, unwilling to provoke war with the United States. Now, with Wayne's army camped nearby, the situation was even more delicate. Campbell sent word asking Wayne why his army remained so close. Wayne replied that the answer had already been given by the sound of American muskets and the retreat of the native forces. Despite this confidence, Wayne knew his limits. His artillery was not powerful enough to breach the fort's walls. His supply situation would not support prolonged siege. Most importantly, he had no authorization to start a war with Britain. Instead of attacking, Wayne chose a quieter demonstration of control. He rode alone to the walls of Fort Miami and conducted a slow, deliberate inspection of the fort's exterior. British soldiers watched from behind their defenses. No shots were fired. Neither side wanted to be the one that crossed the line. While diplomacy held at the fort, Wayne acted decisively elsewhere. American troops destroyed native villages and crops in the surrounding region. Trading posts connected to British influence were burned within sight of Fort Miami itself. The message was unmistakable. The United States now controlled the territory beyond the fort's walls. Still, Wayne refused to provoke a broader war. After 3 days, the Legion withdrew southward, returning toward Fort Recovery. The British did not pursue. The standoff ended without a single additional shot fired. The significance of this restraint cannot be overstated. Fallen Timbers was not just a battlefield victory. It was a political one. Wayne had proven that the United States could defeat native resistance militarily and confront British power without escalating into open conflict. The balance of power in the Northwest Territory had shifted decisively, but peace had not yet arrived. Small bands continued to harass American patrols and supply lines. The Confederacy had been broken but not erased. The final consequences of Fallen Timbers would be decided not by musket fire, but by treaties, and by the choices leaders made in the months that followed. The Battle of Fallen Timbers ended in barely more than an hour. Its consequences lasted for generations. In the weeks that followed the battle, Anthony Wayne expected renewed attacks. Instead, the large, unified resistance he had faced began to dissolve. Native American forces no longer assembled in major numbers. Harassment continued, but the Confederacy that had defeated Harmar and destroyed St. Clair's army was broken. Wayne pressed his advantage carefully. In September of 1794, he resumed his advance into heart of the Miami homeland. He marched unopposed to Kikionga, a key native center, where he constructed Fort Wayne. This final position cemented American control over the region's most important crossroads. That winter, Wayne reinforced his chain of forts across the Northwest Territory, ensuring that the Legion could move and resupply without fear of ambush. For the first time since independence, the United States exercised real, enforceable authority over the frontier. Native leaders understood what this meant. By December, delegations began arriving at American forts seeking peace. One by one, nations that had once fought together now negotiated separately. The unity that had made resistance possible was gone. In August of 1795, representatives of multiple Native American nations met with Wayne to sign the Treaty of Greenville. The treaty redrew the map of the Northwest. Large portions of present-day Ohio were ceded to the United States. In return, native nations received guaranteed lands farther west and promises of annuities. To American officials, the treaty represented peace and order. To native communities, it marked the beginning of permanent displacement. At the same time, international pressure shifted. The British, recognizing that their position south of the Great Lakes was no longer sustainable, agreed to withdraw from frontier forts under the terms of Jay's Treaty. British influence in the region faded, replaced by American control. The Northwest Territory entered a period of relative calm that would last until the War of 1812. Yet the victory carried internal costs. Throughout the campaign, Wayne's second-in-command, General James Wilkinson, had secretly worked against him. Wilkinson wrote anonymous letters undermining Wayne's reputation and passed intelligence to Spanish officials in exchange for money. Wayne eventually uncovered evidence of this betrayal and prepared to pursue charges. He never got the chance. In December of 1796, Anthony Wayne died unexpectedly, weakened by illness and years of hard campaigning. The investigation into Wilkinson collapsed. Wilkinson would go on to hold senior command positions, his treachery remaining hidden for years. Fallen timbers also shaped future leaders. Young officers who fought under Wayne went on to shape American history. William Henry Harrison, Wayne's aide-de-camp, later became governor of the Indiana Territory and eventually president of the United States. Harrison would fight native resistance again at Tippecanoe in 1811. Among the defeated native warriors was a young Shawnee named Tecumseh. He refused to sign the Treaty of Greenville. Instead, he drew lessons from the battle. Tecumseh would later organize a new pan-tribal confederacy, seeking to succeed where the earlier one had failed. His resistance would culminate in the conflicts leading into the War of 1812. In that sense, Fallen Timbers was not an ending. It was a turning point. The battle marked the first decisive victory of the professional United States Army. It proved that discipline, preparation, and controlled terrain could overcome earlier failures. It secured the Northwest Territory for American settlement and reshaped the balance of power between native nations, the United States and European empires. But it also set a pattern. Military victory followed by treaties. Treaties followed by expansion. Expansion followed by displacement. The fallen trees along the Maumee River were eventually cleared away. The consequences of what happened there were not